In the winter of 1998, I was left on the steps of a small church in Ohio, wrapped in a blue blanket, with nothing but a note pinned to my clothes that read, "Please forgive me." For 26 years, I hated the man who left me there. Then, the day he died, I finally understood why he did it. My name doesn't matter for this story. I was found on the church steps by Father Daniel, the parish priest, at around 6 in the morning, barely a few days old. I was adopted 8 months later by a kind couple, Mark and Diane, who raised me as their own and never hid the truth about how I came into their lives. Growing up, I built an entire identity around resentment toward the parents who left me. I imagined a young, irresponsible couple who simply didn't want the burden of a baby. I told myself that story for over 2 decades because it was easier than not having an answer at all. When I turned 18, I requested my adoption records, hoping for a name, anything. All I found was a single line, the note pinned to my blanket, and a police report confirming no identifying information had ever been recovered. I assumed, at that point, I would go my entire life without ever knowing who my biological father was. Everything changed 4 years ago, when a woman named Carol reached out to me through a DNA Ancestry website I'd registered on almost as an afterthought. She identified herself carefully, gently, as my biological father's sister, my aunt. She told me my father's name was Robert and that he had passed away 6 years earlier, long before I'd even taken the DNA test. She said he had never stopped looking for me, quietly, for years, but a fire at the county records office in the early 2000s had destroyed the documentation that might have connected us sooner. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, mostly at first. If he was looking for me, why did he leave me on those church steps to begin with? Carol said there was more to the story, but that it wasn't hers to tell completely. She said Robert had left a letter, sealed, held by his lawyer, meant only for me in the event I was ever found. It took me almost 8 months to work up the courage to request it. The letter arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat in my car in a parking lot for nearly an hour before I opened it. Robert wrote that my mother, a woman he loved deeply, had died during childbirth, from complications no one at the small rural hospital had caught in time. He was 20 years old, alone, with no family support, no stable income, and a newborn he had no idea how to care for. He wrote that he stood outside that church for almost an hour in the freezing cold before he could make himself walk up those steps, and that leaving me there was, in his words, the only decision I ever made that I was certain was for you and not for me. He wrote that he spent years afterward trying to build a life stable enough to come find me, only to lose the trail after the records office fire, and then years more paralyzed by guilt and shame, convinced that showing up after so long would only hurt me further, not help me. He wrote that he thought about me every single year on my birthday, and that he'd kept the hospital bracelet from the day I was born in a small box in his nightstand until the day he died. I drove to Carol's house the following weekend. She showed me the box. Inside was the tiny hospital bracelet, a photo of my mother I'd never seen, and a stack of birthday cards. One for every year of my life. None of them ever mailed. All of them addressed simply, "To my daughter, wherever you are." Carol told me Robert had asked, near the end of his life, that if I was ever found, someone should tell me he was sorry, not for leaving me on those steps, but for never finding the courage to come back sooner. I sat with those unmailed birthday cards for a long time that afternoon, reading 26 years of a father's guilt and love that never reached me until it was far too late for him to see my reaction to any of it. I'm not telling you this story because I've made peace with everything. Some days I still feel angry that I grew up without him. Other days I understand a 20-year-old boy standing outside a church in the cold, making an impossible decision alone, better than I ever thought I would. What I do know is that the version of him I built in my head for 26 years, careless, cold, indifferent, was nothing like the man in those letters. He thought about me every single day. He just never found the courage to let me know it while he still could. If there's someone in your life you've judged based on an incomplete story, maybe it's worth asking if there's a version of the truth you haven't heard yet. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments and subscribe next week. I'm reading the 26 birthday cards he never got to send, one by one.